Hey friends, and welcome back to the Alex Makes VR podcast. In today's episode, we're going straight for the money shot. That's right, we're talking about when should you charge clients, aka when do you ask for the money? When do you get the moolah? We'll talk about all of that, whether it's upfront, afterwards, as soon as you deliver, 30 days after. We're going to talk about all of the money myths to get you started with charging clients in this episode. If you've got a subject or a question for future episodes, though, I would love to hear from you. I base all of these episodes around you guys, the listeners' actual real-life questions and experiences. Some people send me full-length emails with their whole kind of work history with questions peppered throughout. And sometimes most likely I will always reply directly, but also then cover some of those key topics in this podcast for it to help others. Or you can just shoot me a DM. People love a cheeky little quick DM, whichever social media platform you frequent most. Just pop me a message with your question or even just an observation or something that you found interesting. Whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you. It's Alex Makes VR on all of the social media platforms. And lastly, every single Monday when these episodes go live, I send out an accompanying newsletter straight to your inbox. It covers the key takeaways from the episode usually, so you can almost think of it as like a weekly worksheet that kind of arrives in your inbox, and it's a way for you to maybe think, I listened to that episode a few weeks ago and there was something she said of importance, but I can't remember which episode it was, or I can't remember what the point was. So sometimes it's useful to have those emails in your inbox waiting for you so you can kind of quickly have a look at what was discussed in the episode. If you want to sign up for that, you can do so at alexmakesvr.com. So money, the conversation of money, it fascinates me because so many people that want to get into the self-employed or the small business space, people like yourself listening, you might really want to be self-employed and work for yourself, but the thing stopping you is the uncomfortableness about having to talk about money. The very fact that you're going from being paid a lovely salary, you know exactly how much you get paid, it gets paid in exactly the same time every month. All of a sudden, now you're in charge of having the conversation with clients about how much money you're going to charge them and when they're going to pay you. And often, more times than not, chasing them because they're late on payment. This is the number one thing that I see people get a bit anxious about. There's a lot of brilliant creatives out there listening. I'm sure you're one of them, that just have the skill set, but just are too kind of scared or nervous about the notion of having to understand that side of things, having to have conversations about money, knowing what payment terms are, etc. And that's the thing that often stops people. And I don't want that to happen to you, you beautiful being you, because you deserve to have the freedom and the excitement of working for yourself if you are so inclined to do so. Because when you're an employee somewhere, all you've got to understand is the only difference is that the person above you is having the money talks, not you. And you're being paid maybe a fifth, if that, a fifth. I've literally plucked that fraction out of thin air. But if you work for a massive company, obviously you're being paid like such a tiny, minuscule amount compared to the amount of money that the head of that company or the head of sales or whatever is charging other people. Basically, the more comfortable you can get with money conversations, the bigger percentage of the money pie you will get, essentially. Not always, but generally speaking. Wow, that was a tangent. Let's get right back on track then. When do you ask clients for money? So let's simplify that, because I don't want you to be one of those people that is scared of having conversations about money. It's fascinating to me that people find it really taboo to talk about it. I think there needs to be more transparency. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about you're just starting your freelance business. For the sake of argument, I'm going to say you're a 360 videographer and you approach a business and you've gone through the pitching process. You were nervous, but you smashed it. You're exhilarated. They've committed to spend $5,000 with you on their first 360 video tour, whatever it might be. So 5,000, excellent. They've agreed to it, fantastic. They might ask you then what your payment terms are. If they don't ask you what your payment terms are, you need to initiate that conversation. As soon as you have agreed on a price, you need to discuss payment terms. You can do this really simply. You can either say something to the effect of, especially if they're a bigger company, there's no point in you putting your payment terms out there because they will have set payment terms that they can't get out of. So you could either say, if you're working with a bigger company, you can say, once you've confirmed that price, brilliant, can you outline your payment terms for me? Usually mine would be XYZ. That is generally what I would do. Is even if it's like a smaller business, you could say, yep, great. So we've agreed on this price. Just so you know, my payment terms are XYZ. Let me know that's okay. Before you do any work, I really need to hammer this into your skull because this breaks my heart, the amount of people get this wrong. Before you start any work, you need to have in writing, aka an email preferably, someone confirming the payment terms. The reason this is important is if you leave that conversation to when you've already started the work, you've lost your leverage. And don't get me wrong, like I know, even my brother, bless him, my younger brother who's an animator by trade, he still runs into this where it's a last minute rush job and he's been contacted on like a Thursday evening and they need it by Friday evening. And so he just kind of like rushes it through without talking about payment terms. And then it becomes a painful process afterwards of having to just kind of like back and forth on like, because all of a sudden, of course, like you've already started the work. There's not really much skin off their nose now if they like take 60 days to pay you, or if they're like, oh yeah, sorry, yeah, I need to get you thingied with finance, blah, 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 blah. So the reason I say get your payment terms confirmed up front is because then you both know where you stand, okay? So you could say, for example, these are my standard payment terms. Great, $5,000, brilliant, can't wait to start work with you. Just so you know, my payment terms are a 50% deposit upfront that needs to be paid before production starts. And then the 50% balance is due within 14 days of delivery. Okay, so that's my personal payment terms. 50% upfront, as in as soon as we've confirmed, great, the invoice goes straight in for 50%. That I do not start work until that 50% has been paid. Okay. Now, this can sometimes cause a bit of a headache because if you're working with a bigger company, their payment terms will usually be 30 days or 28 working days once the invoice has been received. So this is again why the conversation of payment terms is really, really important upfront. Okay. So generally speaking, for me, 50% deposit upfront. Great. They've paid it. We go through the process of production. I will always stipulate the amount of amends that are included in that price. So that's part of the budget conversation. This isn't really a payment terms conversation, but let's say it's $5,000 and that includes 2 rounds of amends only. Anything outside of that is charged additionally. So charge the deposit, great, they've paid it, we've done production, fantastic. We've been through 2 rounds of amends. Everyone's happy. The project is signed off. When you deliver your final files, however that might be, whether you're delivering an MP4 or an SDK, or it might be stills, or it might be a virtual tour, whatever it is that you're delivering. Once you deliver that final asset, you also, in that email or in the same moment that you're sending them the final files, you send them your balance invoice, okay? Deposit invoice and then balance invoice. In that balance invoice, you will say on the invoice in plain sight, mine usually is next to the total, you will say when that invoice is due, okay? So make sure you put a date on the invoice. You can either put a date or you can say due within 14 days. So for me personally, I always put the actual date. So if I'm sending it on the 1st of Feb, the total is 5,000. invoice is due on the 14th of February with thanks. Something like that, okay? So right up top, you've had the conversation. You know when you're going to get paid. They know when they are expecting to pay you. And you can do all sorts of different things. Like you could, put an incentive for people to pay sooner. I've seen people do that, where it's like if you pay before, if you pay within 7 days, for example, or if you pay upon receipt. Invoice that is due upon receipt means that as soon as you send that invoice, it is due. So the second that someone receives it, they should then pay it, aka within kind of 24, 48 hours. So you could offer a discount. You could say, 5% off if you pay within 3 days or something like that. You could do that if you wanted to. That's my preference anyway. I do the split, the 50% up top, 50% within 14 days of delivery. Now, what you could do is if you are working with slightly smaller clients, because I should preface that those are my standard terms, but I tend to work with bigger companies that have their own terms, in which case you don't really have a choice. You just kind of have to trust. But usually the bigger companies have much more procedure in place, and you've actually contracted, with the payment terms in there. So you know that you will get paid. So usually like a bigger company might not necessarily be able to get you that money upfront, although you can still charge for it and it will just kind of come through 30 days later. And then once you invoice for the balance, that then will be paid 30 days after that as well. But yeah, anyway, coming back to it. So if you're working with really small companies, which I imagine you will be if this is your kind of first foray into freelance life, what you could do is you could say, obviously, I would still try and get a deposit up front. I feel like that's just good practice. That just shows kind of goodwill. It shows, I don't know. I just think it kind of, it does feel a bit more professional, whether or not that's just a kind of placebo effect. It's just, I think that you probably should be charging a deposit. That shows that the client is committed to you. There's not going to be a big hoo-ha. If production goes absolutely tits up, you've at least got 50% of the money. So I would always recommend that you do try and charge a deposit. But if you're working with a really small company or it's a really small job, it's, a half-day shoot, and they just want the raw files from you. So, I don't know how much you would charge for that, $300, $400 dollars, something like that. With that kind of money, maybe you don't really need a deposit, and it's so quick turnaround. I've talked to Terry on Tuesday and he wants me to come in on Thursday. Chances are he's not going to be able to pay a deposit. And it's not really worth it for that kind of money. But I would still get them to commit to payment terms in an email, just so legally you've got some kind of comeback if for some reason they don't pay you. So, great, Terry, I'll come and do your half-day shoot and deliver the raw files. That to confirm, that's going to cost you $400. My payment terms are... this invoice will be due before files are delivered. Okay, so what you would do in this process, and this is something again that I've advised my younger brother to do in the past, and it's worked really, really well. It's really motivated his clients to pay him and make sure that they're committed to that. So in this instance, you would do your shoot, and then what you would do is, especially if there's in that example, obviously there aren't any amends because you're delivering raw files. But what you would do in that scenario is you would say, fantastic working with you. I can send you some watermarked files if you like to check them before. If not, here's the invoice. And you would just put on the invoice due upon receipt. AKA, you ain't getting the files unless you've paid my bill, sunshine. So that's another way of doing things. So you don't necessarily have to charge a deposit, but you charge once you've done the project, but before you deliver the files. Now, if you do have amends to do, or and rightly so, if the client wants to see some of the shots before they pay the invoice, that's absolutely fair. what I would suggest is that you watermark everything and potentially send a lower resolution version of whatever it is. When you watermark, make sure that you watermark across the middle of the image. Don't put it in the corner because it's too easy to crop out. So you finish the shoot, you send the watermark files over. Once they've confirmed, yep, this looks great, then you send them the invoice, and as soon as they've paid the invoice, that's when you deliver the files. The worst thing you can do, and again, loads of people do this, and it's totally fine if this is something that you have done or if this is something you're doing currently. I would urge you to kind of change your practices as of hearing this episode, is a lot of people won't charge a deposit. They'll just kind of like agree everything with the client without kind of confirming payment terms or anything. They'll do the job, they'll deliver it, they'll have gone through however many rounds of amends because they haven't said how much they should be doing. And then they give the invoice in, hoping that it will just be paid whenever, but they don't put a date on the invoice. And then that invoice conveniently gets lost by the client, or it gets pushed back, or they're like, oh, we actually have this other thing come up now. So like, can you tack that invoice onto the next invoice? And all of a sudden you've gone 2 months without any money coming in, which is a complete nightmare. This is why freelancers and small businesses need to have solid payment terms. And this is the thing that really, really frustrates me with clients that don't pay on time. It would be the equivalent of someone saying, oh, soz, I'm not paying your salary this month because I haven't got enough cash, or like, oh yeah, I've like misplaced your salary, so I'm going to pay you next week if that's all right. There are laws in place that will kind of are there to help you safeguard the rights to be paid on time. So you can legally charge a late fee if they don't pay on time. But if you have not outlined your payment terms up front, you have no leg to stand on, because how are they supposed to know that you were expecting to be paid within 5 days? Do you know what I mean? So let me recap, because I banged on for 15 minutes about payment terms, which to me is very exciting, but I'm not sure how many of you are still awake. Who needs calm and sleepy stories when you've got the Alex Makes VR podcast, money edition? Anyway, so let me run you through it again. I would recommend you've agreed on a budget for a project. We're going ahead. Excellent. Everything's been confirmed. Okay. So you send an email, and in that email, you say, just so you know, these are my payment terms. It's 50% deposit upfront, followed by balance invoice due within 14 days of delivery. Or 50% deposit upfront and 50% balance invoice paid upon receipt. I will not release the final files to you until that invoice has been paid. Or you're going to do the job without a deposit, and you say, just so you know, my payment terms are, I will invoice once the job is complete, but before I deliver the final files to you. Is that okay? Let me know if that's okay. If you're working with a bigger company, let me know if that fits with your payment terms, or let me know if, can you confirm that this is okay? Basically, you need a written verbal agreement back. Yeah, that's great. Or no, actually, our finance works on 30-day terms, so can you change that to 30-day terms? Blah, 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 blah. You need all of that in writing before you start your work. Okay. I'm not going to bang on anymore, but I hope this was helpful. It really is super simple, but really do think and treat yourself as if you were an employee and you were expecting to be paid on time, because you deserve to be paid on time. You deserve to be paid for your services. You deserve not to be messed around. But some clients, weirdly, especially the smaller ones, will try all sorts of tricks to get around it. But if you've agreed the payment terms upfront and they've agreed to it, then they've not really got any comeback. You've agreed everything. There's nothing really that they can say down the line to be like, oh, hang on a second, I wasn't expecting to pay this invoice before the... Do you know what I mean? It's kind of... And if you've got a client that has got a it's last minute and it's a rush job, but finance can't thingy and blah, 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 I would strongly urge you to say, well, is there any way that you can talk to them about changing that for this particular job? And you could even say, look, I've been burned in the past, or you could say, yeah, I'm really sorry, I don't do jobs without payment terms agreed up front anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, really, they shouldn't ask you to change that. They shouldn't kind of... No one can argue with the fact that you deserve to be paid. So if there are like special circumstances, or there's something that's like a different scenario than the ones that I've outlined, get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to offer you some advice if it's like a very specific scenario that I haven't kind of thought through on this podcast. But I hope that helps you. I hope that you really do just go for it, and don't let the conversations around money, and don't let these kind of what can be seen as quite big, scary things to have to overcome, don't let them hold you back. I promise you, it is so much easier when you just start going. And actually, people really respect the professionalism of someone that kind of outlines this stuff up front. At the end of the day, the client just wants to work with a professional. They want a good service, they want a good product, and they want to have their hand held by you taking the initiative and saying, these are my payment terms. Are you okay with that? Or let me know if that's okay, or can you agree to these before we get started? Whatever it might be. They will respect that because you are the one defining the process. And that means they don't have to do it, which saves them time and mental energy. It's a win-win. So don't be scared. Charge for your work. Make sure you get that deposit. Please, if you're doing projects any more than like $1,000, even less, to be honest, it depends on like how long it's taking, but please get a deposit invoice. It's so, so important. And that's it. Business guru, Alex Rule, signing off. I should also say that my advice in this podcast is totally anecdotal and should not be taken as any kind of financial or legal advice. This is purely from my own experience. So please do, as a disclaimer, go get other kind of legally binding advice if you so feel the need to. My advice is not a substitute for that, but it's just anecdotal. You'll be fine. Get cracking, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.